Good morning, Shavua Tov. We are beginning today, and it seems it will be two parts. So we are beginning today our learning about a very unique and special rabbi, also very known, we may say, in the folklore of the Jewish people, and that is Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschitz. Now, Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschitz, who lived throughout the first half of the 18th century. He was born in 1694 and passed away at 1764. That's exactly 70 years. And as I said, encompassing more or less the first half of the 18th century. And in many ways, his life story is a representative, and also he himself was in the focal point, we may say in the eye of the storm, of some of the developments in Europe, in European Jewry, during his time, during his period. So he was born, as I said, in 1694 to a very famous and important rabbinical family in Poland. Unfortunately, his mother passed away while he was still a very young child. So his father served for him as both a mother and a father, as he himself would write later. He had wrote, many years later, 30 years later, or 40 years later, he wrote a letter to his sister-in-law after his brother passed away. Also, his brother passed away, and now his sister-in-law is a widow with orphans. And he writes to her a letter. He wrote in Yiddish, but we have it translated. And he wrote to her a letter in which he's trying to console her and to strengthen her. And it's so interesting because in the letter, he gives us account of his own experiences growing up as a yatom, as an orphan. And he writes to her, you know, it is terrible, it's going to be very, very difficult, but you should know that it's an experience that is in strengthening. And if you look, you will see, he says, it's very interesting, he says, most of the orphans are very successful. That's what he writes. Now, again, obviously he's also trying to console her, but it's an observation, very interesting observation. He says, because they know they have to prove themselves, and they became tough by the conditions in which they grew up, then they later succeed in life. Now, each one of you would make his own, I guess, observations from the people that he knows. And he writes also that when someone, chas v'chayila, loses his father or his mother in a young age, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the yetoomin almנות, God, who is the father of all orphans, he becomes the father and the mother. So it's, as I said, it's a beautiful, beautiful letter. It's in source Aleph. I apologize again. Most of you do not have the sources. I see here that we have a few more extras. So it says, it's in the end of source Aleph. Al ken achoti ve'hildim. Writer, my sister, but she's not his sister. She's his sister-in-law. In Yiddish, sometimes you can say sister, even to someone that is not your real sister here. Al ken achoti ve'hildim, shimru al briuteichem, ze harbe yoter me'asher lomar kaddish. That's, again, that's so interesting. It says, you should make sure, first, most important, is that you make sure you remain healthy. And I add, I think he means you that also mental healthiness. Stay happy. It is more important than saying the Kaddish, which obviously in Ashkenaz, I don't have to tell you that in Ashkenaz saying the Kaddish was seen then and for many people now as the first mitzvah, meaning in Aseret HaDibrot. So Moshe Rabbeinu went down, says, say Kaddish, now. So it was seen as extremely, extremely important. People would be moser nefesh in order to be able to daven 3 times a day in a minyan and say the Kaddish. And he says, no, it's more important to keep your health. Now, when we had the corona, just 2 years ago, it can be seen sometimes very, very long ago, but 2 years ago, when it broke out and we had to cancel the minyanim here in Shul, I myself was saying the Kaddish for my father, Zichrono Livracha. And, you know, this type of lines that you find here and other poskim sometimes, they say, yes, Kaddish is extremely important and it's part of our tradition, it's part of our minhagim. Our minhagim are holy, our minhagim are Torah, they are. But as he says here, shimru al briuteichem, maintain your health. Take care of yourself. זה הרבה יותר חשוב מאשר לומר קדיש, כי זו מצווה גדולה יותר אם תשמרו על בריאותיכם ותקבלו מאת השם הכל באהבה ובחיבה, ובזה תתרצו אצל הקדוש ברוך הוא. He says, it's more important you remain healthy, as I said, also mental healthy, and accept everything coming from הקדוש ברוך הוא in love and with affection. It's more important to develop a positive attitude towards life. Now, again, I'm putting in his words, in his mouth, words that he didn't write, but I think that's where he's heading with. You should develop positive attitude. Do not say, you know, chas v'cheila, my mother died when I was young, so I am destined to be nothing in my life because no one would support me. No, he says, look at me. I was, unfortunately, he says on himself, of course, his mother died when he was an infant. As we'll see in a few minutes, his father also passed away when he was 10 or 11. And nonetheless, he became one of the most famous rabbis and important and beloved men of his generation. So he's trying here to strengthen his sister-in-law and their orphans. And as I said, I think it also opens a window into his own life and experiences. His father, as I said, was niftar when he was about, maybe not 10, 11, when he was 15. And in his introduction to his commentary on the Shulchan Aruch Yoredea, which is the only book he printed in his own life. There were many books printed from him after his death, after his passing. But the only sefer he printed, the only halachic sefer he printed during his life was the Creative Plati, that is his commentary on Yoredea. And there he writes in the introduction, Avi harav zal, so my father, the rabbi, zichrono livracha, asher gidlani al birkav, he raised me on his knees. Now what he means here, as I said, that his father served as both his father and his mother. So asher gidlani al birkav, vayipach be'api nishmat chaim, he breathed into me the spirit of life, Torat Hashem dat musar, ובעוונותינו הרבים נטרפה השעה, but in our plentiful sins, the time was devastated. כי מת בקוצר ימיו ועודנו באיבו יקטפנו. So he died in short years, and as a flower that is taken, that is picked while it is still in its bud. ולא היה הזמן לשמשו כראוי. I didn't have the time to learn from him properly. הן בניגלה, הן בנסתר. Not in the appearance side of Torah, I was not able to learn from him everything that I should have, and not in the mysterious side, in the Kabbalah side of the Torah. רזי התורה והמסורה בידו, he says that he had secrets of Torah from the Arizal, and unfortunately, he took the secrets to his grave because I was not able, says Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschitz, his son, I was not able to learn from him what I should have. ועלדה ודאי כבחינה, that's something to cry for. ואמרתי, תשכח, so beautiful, תשכח לשוני, תדבק לשוני לחיקי, אם אזכרנו מתמיד על ראש שמיכתי. So he's obviously paraphrasing here the pasuk, right? So the pasuk we all know says, "Tidbak leshoni lechiki," my tongue would stick to my mouth if I would not take Yerushalayim and mention it on the above my happiness. So that's why in Chatunot or in other happy occasions we mention Yerushalayim. So he says, my tongue should stick to my throat if I would not mention my father every time I speak in my rabbinical role, al smichati, not simchati, but smichati, my ordination. אשר נסמכתי מקהל השם לרב ומורה, ומלמד לאנוש בינה לבני אדם דעת. So I have the merit, I have the privilege to teach Torah to people, he says. I need to mention my father as many times as I can. Why? Because he was the one to initiate me on the right path, and I didn't have the merit, he says, to learn from him to the full capacity of what he was supposed, what he could have given me. And we can only imagine the regrets, right, of someone. And well, we all know how young people are in the age of 10 or 12 or 15. He was a genius, and I'm sure that he learned more than most of, I shouldn't say about you, but more than what I was learning in the age of 11 or 12. But nonetheless, he was a young boy as any other young boy. And then when you look at that from every one of us after losing a parent, right? Not regardless of the age, we say to ourselves, we could have learned so much more. We could have asked so many more questions. We should have listened. And how much more is that when the father was really a great rabbi and he was niftar in such a young age and such a tragedy, because now Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschitz lost both of his parents when he was only 14 or 15. So he moves to live with his Rosh Yeshiva. It was called Rabbi Meir Eisenstadt, or the Maramesh. He was a known figure in his time. And he learned by him, learned in the storm. It was obviously very, very successful. And it was clear that he is a Gaon. It was clear it was a Gaon. Now, there are many stories, as I said, in the Jewish folklore. There are many stories about Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschitz. I would only mention a few here because they are countless, and obviously 99% of them are fiction. But they do teach us something about the personality. So they say that when he was a young child, his father was still alive, and they were not very rich. And the father sees him sneaking to the kitchen on Friday and eating from the food that was prepared for Shabbat. So the father asked the son, the boy, a young boy, 6 or 7, he said, "What do you do?" And the boy, "We don't have food for Shabbat." So the boy says, it says in the tefillah, To'amea chaim zachu. Right? To'amea, those that taste it, it's Shabbat, but he says, taste the food, chaim zachu, they earn life. So the father says, "Okay, fine, so you can taste, but why did you finish all of the chulent?" So the boy said, "V'gam oavim devarea gdola bacharu." So those that love the Shabbat choose the great. So that's the type of the boy. They say the father became a rabbi in Altona. Excuse me, in Eibeschitz, of course. Altona is his father along the story. He became the rabbi of Eibeschitz. That's why Rabbi Yonatan was later called Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschitz, because he came from Eibeschitz. So the father became a rabbi in Eibeschitz. And one day it happened that there was a blood libel by the goyim, that a certain Jew that was selling shamim, he was selling perfume, and he had his store next to the goyish butcher. And the goyish butcher had claimed that the Jew stole money from him. Now, somehow it seems that the goy was able to see where the Jew is hiding his money. So the sign that the Jew was stealing money from him is that the goy knew how much money is going to be in the hiding place of the money of the Jew. And that's a proof that the money was stolen from the goy. And the Jew was taken to court, and the situation looked very bleak because, as you know, if one Jew is being convicted for stealing, then that is a very good excuse for a pogrom. And the goyim were, preparing their knives. So the story goes that the whole of the community was in the shul, and the Rabbi Yonatan's father, Rabbi Natan Neta, that was his name, he was leading the tefillot, and they would fast, and they say Tehillim, and the children, by the meantime, were playing outside. So Rabbi Yonatan, what they were playing a court with the Goyish party and the Jewish party, and the son of the rabbi was the judge. So they put Rabbi Yonatan as the judge in his children's court. And Rabbi Yonatan sat there, a young boy, and he said, "I know how we would test if the argument is right. How would we test it? The goy is a butcher, right? So if he really touched the coins, there would be oil on the coins from the meat. So what we will do, we will take the coins, the golden coins, we put them in hot water. If there would be a fat that would go up in the water, we would know that it came from the butcher. But the perfume that the Jew is using that leaves no trace in the water. It dissolves. So if it's a Jew, the water would remain clean and would have good smell. So, and that was how the boy said in the court. Now, a certain Jew that just passed by heard the young Rabbi Yonatan with this brilliant solution. So he went straight forward into the shul to the father and said, you know, your son has the key to solving the issue. And they went to the judge and they offered it to the judge and the judge accepted and they did the test. And everyone in the city saw that the water remained clean and became even with good smell. And that's how the case was dismissed. Now, again, as I said, I do not take any responsibility for the historicity of the story. But he was a prodigy. He was a genius from a young age. And he was also, and that's very important to see from these stories, he was very playful. And that is a trait that he would keep throughout all of his life. It would later it would get him into really big troubles. But he was very playful. He was telling jokes. He was a man of people. We had a few rabbis in a row, I think in the last month, that were great geniuses, but were not necessarily, you know, very diplomatic. Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschitz was not a diplomatic person. He was not tactful because, as I said, he was more playful than tactful, but people loved him. People loved hearing him. And we'll get to that in a few minutes. But he was a very, very beloved person. He had a very warm personality. He had thousands of students throughout his lifetime. Almost all of them wrote about him with great, great affection. So he later, after living by his rabbi, Rabbi Meir Eisenstadt de Maramesh, he later went on to Vienna, as we call it in Hebrew, Vienna. And there he lived by a local gvir, one of the Ashirim, the rich persons of the Kehila there. His name was Reb Shimshon Wertheimer. Now, I guess it doesn't say anything to anyone sitting here in the room, and didn't also say anything to me a few weeks ago before I prepared this show. But it seems that he was an extremely important person back in the day. He was very rich. It seems that he was the richest Jew living in Europe of the time, and they had their own share, some of them. So he was very, very rich. He was what we call today a court Jew, or Yehudi Chatzer. So he was going in and out from the courts of the kings of Europe, and they very much looked at this Reb Shimshon Wertheimer as someone that can finance them, very important, and he's decent, also very important, and he's smart. Now, they say another story that this Reb Shimshon Wertheimer wanted to marry young Yonatan to his own daughter. That's why he kept in his own house. Okay, fine. And when they became almost engaged, so he took him to a tour in the palace of the Emperor of Vienna. And back then, the young daughter of the Emperor of Vienna was Maria Theresa, who later became a very known empress by herself. But then she was still a young lady. So this young lady was chosen to be the tourist guide for the young Yonatan and his Be'ezrat Hashem future wife. So they are having this tour in the palace, and they come to a certain room in which there was a big statue of the Christian idol, and made out of gold. And Maria Theresa was extremely Catholic. She was extremely, extremely Christian, and it was part of the problem later for the Jews when she was the ruler. But she was also, as a young, she was very devoted Christian. And they see this statue, and she says to young Yonatan, you know, you should speak to the statue. He would answer you. And obviously, she was planning a trap. And so Yonatan said, you know, we have in Yahadut this rule that always the greatest should be the one to speak first. It's in humility. So the statue is so great, we would wait for him to speak first, to open. And she was very angry with him answering her like that. And she caused Reb Shimshon to cancel the wedding between Yonatan and the young lady. That's how the story goes. That's how the story goes. Later on, she would also, as an adult, as an impulse, she would make great troubles. she would be part of his troubles in life. Now, so that story may be true. Maybe true. And that's the story from Vienna. All the time, obviously, he's learning. I don't mention it because it's simple. Right? So he's learning all the time, and he become extremely important and famous for his genius and for his knowledge and for his Torah. In 1710, he does marry. So it's in the old age of 16. Back then, it's 3 years late. So he's getting married at the age of 16 to a very well-known family of rabbis. So that's as from Ichu's point of view in the pre-Hasidic world, right? Because we are in the beginning of the 18th century. Hasidim are about to go into the picture, but just not yet. So in the pre-Hasidic world, he's as the Ichus as good as you can get, both from his own side, both from his wife's side, who was connected. I mean, again, the names would not say too much to people nowadays, but in the world of 200 years ago, they were extremely important. We speak about Rabbi Yaakov Reischer, the writer of the Shvut Yaakov. We speak about Rabbi David Offenheim, the author of the Shal David, who was also very rich by himself. He had the greatest library of Jewish books in Europe. It became later the foundation of what is now called, maybe you'd know it, the Bodleian Library in Oxford. So very well known. And so he was married into an extremely important family. His life will seem just on track. Now, you know what is going to happen now. Not yet. He goes to Prague to live by the grandfather of his wife. Now, again, when you marry at the age of 16, it makes sense to go to live by the grandfather of your wife. At the age of 19, he becomes the darshan of Prague. So he's becoming the person that goes between the shuls and he gives drashot. Now, his drashot would go for 5 or 6 hours. And people would be, that's all of the testimonies, even people that later become to hate him for reasons that would explain in next week. So even his greatest enemies admitted that he had the ability to captivate, I don't know of any other word, captivate people for 6 hours, going on straight with a drasha. Now, I go for 6 minutes. But so that was not printed in his lifetime. Here you have about 25 of his drashot. In this, so 25 drashot. And that's, I don't know, 500 pages between these two sefarim. It was obviously the most important drashot would be, as always, in Aseret Yemei Tshuva, in time for Slichot, in Shabbat HaGadol for Pesach. So most of the drashot are not just from around the year, but from these Shabbatot, Espedim, many Espedim. So these drashot are extremely complicated. The truth is, I really don't know how I could pull it off. Extremely complicated. They are made of halacha, agada, some zohar, some rebukes, all of them interwoven in very sophisticated, in complicated ways. I mean, I don't think I'm an ignorant, and I see it, and I need to really hold my head to understand when I read it slowly. I just cannot imagine him giving it, but maybe he was, not maybe, for sure, he was an extremely skilled speaker. Extremely skilled speaker. People would not pay for someone if they are getting bored and he's taking them hostage for 5 hours. And they were financing him. So obviously he was extremely skilled. I just brought you 2 examples, very short ones, don't worry. One is from a drasha from the days of Slichot. The reason why I brought it here is because he's using a pasuk from our parsha that we read yesterday. So in the parsha we read that after Sichon conquered from Moab parts of the country, and then there is a poem, very strange poem, written in the Torah, in which it says, כי חשבון עיר סיחון. חשבון was the city of סיחון. והוא נלחם במלך מואב הראשון, ויקח את כל ארצו מידו. So סיחון waged war against Moab, the first king of Moab, and was able to take the whole country from his hand. ועל כן יאמרו המושלים, בואו חשבון. That's why the rulers say, let's go to חשבון. These are the psukim in the Torah. They are very, very difficult to understand. I'm sure that you all sat throughout the Shabbat and looked in Mikal Gdolot to all of the Pirushim. But now we would give the drasha. I was not here, so you had the time to do that. But now the drasha that he gave was the following. Chazal teach that the pasuk al ken yomru hamoshlim bo'u cheshbon. The ruler said, let's go to Cheshbon. Now Cheshbon is the name of the city. It's a proper name. But it's also in Hebrew means to calculate. Cheshbon, mathematica, to calculate. So the Chazal told this pasuk, and the rulers, meaning the people that rule themselves, should calculate their ways. Bo'u cheshbon. Let's do cheshbon. Let's do cheshbon hanefesh. Let's calculate our actions. Now, what is about taking cheshbon and then taking the whole country? So Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschitz explained that in the beginning, when Sichon only conquered Cheshbon, then the king of Moab said, okay, it's only Cheshbon, it's one small city, it doesn't matter so much. So he didn't recruit all of his army in order to take Cheshbon back. But what happened was that after Sichon was able to breach, to make a first step, to put his foot in the door, as we say, then later he was able to take over the whole country of Moab. Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschitz says the same thing is about the Yetzer Hara. In the beginning, he only says to you, you know, this small thing, it's not so important. It says no dire consequences. So nothing would happen if you have a very difficult time, you had a very difficult week, the children make you crazy. Yeah, nothing would happen if you'd enjoy something a little. And then, if you'd let him put his foot in the door, just like Moab enabled Sichon to take Cheshbon, if you wouldn't calculate your ways, then you'd be in a downhill that you won't be able to stop. That was his drasha. And he gave, the example he gave, it's an interesting example, it was about people being too friendly, married men with married women. So I'm not sure what was happening in Prague in the time, but it seems that he felt that it's something that he needs to in strength. So he said, in the beginning, you say, I am only looking. Nothing happens if I look. Right? Nothing happens if I look. Then you begin to speak. Then you begin to meet. Then, okay. So it's very easy to forgive yourself for a minor violation. But you have to understand that a minor violation is many times the first step to complete surrender to the Yetzer Hara. So that's an interesting drasha. Now it's a very small piece of this drasha. It's a much, much, much longer thing. But I thought it's interesting the way that he sees the pasuk and also the message that he is giving. By the way, many of his drashot are rebukes. He's so gentle. He's not so gentle. He's giving it very straight, but it's so rich and so many stories and so many commentaries and proofs that you do not feel that he's hitting on your head with a stick. He's doing that, but he's making it pleasant in the process. And so you are able to accept, and I think that was one of his great points as a public speaker, that he was able to get across also unpopular messages because his way of speaking was so nice. And that's a very important feature for a public speaker, that he shouldn't only cater to the public, he should also say things even if they are unpopular. But on the other hand, if you're just saying unpopular things and you're unpopular and then no one listens to you, then obviously you didn't gain anything. So there is a very complicated balance you have to strike, in which people want to listen to you, but you say to them not necessarily the things that they want to hear. And that's something that he was able to achieve. Another beautiful drasha, another beautiful idea from one of his drashot, that's a drasha for Aseret Yemei Tshuva now. So he gave a mashal. He explained why does he always give rebukes? Some people were asking themselves. So he was only 19 at the time, remember, or 20, 21. And he's standing there on the duchan, on the bima, and he's firing away. And he gives a story. He says, imagine that there is certain trader in the Yarid in Leipzig. So Leipzig was the big city of commerce, and they had the Yarid. The Yarid is like the market. Yeah, but the market day, the market day. So once a year, there would be a week of convention, and traders would become from all around the land and would trade. And many times you take loan on 1 year and you'd return it on the following year. So that's the way it worked. You'd buy schora, you'd buy, again? Merchandise, thank you. You'd buy merchandise, you're not able to pay now because you didn't sell them yet. And the point is that you take the merchandise on credit, you sell them with big profit, and then you are able both to profit yourself and to pay for the merchandise of last year, and the process begin again. So that's how it worked. What happened if one of the traders, says Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschitz, does not have the money to pay? So there are two ways. One, he would not come to the market day, but then he would not be able to make any money for next year as well. Second way, he can come to the market day and just not pay, but then he's going to have a very difficult day in the market day. The third way, he says, is if he would convince other traders that they should pay on time. And then these traders would come to the big trader and they would pay him. They would say, you know why we pay now? Because this Ploini, this guy, convinced us that we should pay on time. And then the big trader would develop some type of an affection for this unpaying trader. And then when the unpaying trader would come, maybe would be able to work something with the big trader to delay the payment for another year. Says Rabbi Yonatan, that's me. I have dues to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I cannot pay them. So what do? I convince you, right, the people of the congregation, the people of the shul, I convince you to pay your dues on time, and then I hope that HaKadosh Baruch Hu would allow me to postpone my payments for another year. So that's, I thought that's very cute. So again, these are ways in which the speaker is able to take the listeners to his own side. After you said such a thing, you're not a threat anymore. Right? You are nice, you're saying cute things. And then you are able to begin to give them on the head about, he was speaking a lot about tzniut. So speak about tzniut, you can speak about lashon hara, all the things that a good speaker in Jewish life needs to speak about. I think I told you once the story about a certain darshan in America. And he stands up to the shul, in the shul, and he gives, in the first Shabbat, he speaks about Shabbat, the needs to keep Shabbat. And he gives the drasha, then he walks down. And the president says to him, you know, we gave a very nice drasha, but you know, shul Shabbat is a very sensitive area. Maybe you shouldn't speak about Shabbat. Okay, fine. Next week, he stands up and he gives a whole drasha about shalom, not having machloktim, not having lashon hara. Steps down from the bima. And the president says, you know, it's a very sensitive issue in our place. Okay, so he comes the next week. Spoke about davening, not speaking davening. Steps down again. The president comes. It's very sensitive. So what do you want me to speak about? You know, speaks nicely. Speak about Yiddishkeit. And so he was able to speak about Yiddishkeit, but give them the Musa, give them the halacha, and speaks about what does really matter. And that was a very strong, and it was by his wisdom and by his wits, because he had such a sharp tongue. So he was able to make jokes, to take people to his own side. And that was very important for his ability to succeed as a good darshan. Later on, he was also acknowledged not only as a good darshan, but also as a very good teacher of Torah and Gemara. And after the Rosh Yeshiva of Prague passed away, so he was chosen also to be the Rosh Yeshiva, and much later he was also chosen to be the ודין. So he, as one person, filled the role of three. He was the Darshan, the Rosh Yeshiva, and the ודין, but he was a real genius, so he was able to accomplish all of these. As a posek, as a ודין, his position was that after the Shulchan Aruch and the Rema were written and accepted, so they are the limitations of Psika. There is a lot of room to maneuver in between, but they are signaling what we call in Hebrew the gvulot gizra, right? The limitation, the boundaries of where you can go. So you can, even if you find some Rishon, some authority from the medieval times that wrote something else, you cannot rely on it anymore. After the Shulchan Aruch and the Rema were written, what is written in them is completely binding. That's how we understood. So he's one of the most important figures in this process of what we call today the canonization of the Shulchan Aruch. Right now, nowadays we say he is a Jew of the Shulchan Aruch. Right, he's a Eid of the Shulchan Aruch. What we mean to say is, I apologize that I use this categories. He's an Orthodox Jew, right? So what does it mean to be an Orthodox Jew? He's following the Shulchan Aruch. Now we all know what does it mean to follow the Shulchan Aruch. In many psikot, we do not do as the Shulchan Aruch or as the Rema. I don't think it's an open secret what I'm saying now. But it means that the Shulchan Aruch is an overarching authority. And he is one of the most important figures to push this thesis, we may say, that the Shulchan Aruch and the Rema are defining what does it mean to be a traditional Jew. And that's a very important contribution of Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschitz. He wrote a perush, as I said, on the Shulchan Aruch on Yoredea. It's called Kreti Vepleti. That's the only sefer he written in his own life. He also wrote a perush on Chelek Choshen Mishpat, the monetary part of the Shulchan Aruch, which is called Urim Vetumim. It's a very important commentary. Because it was very long, he didn't have the financial means to print it in his own lifetime. It was only printed later. He wrote it, he arranged it for printing, but he didn't have the money. As a matter of fact, for many years, his life was centered around how can I print my writings. They were prepared for printing, but he just couldn't allocate the resources, the money to print them. He lived in cities. In Prague, there was no printing press at the time. Now for us, okay, so what the problem is? Send an email. But you cannot send an email. In order to print something, if you want it to be done properly, you need to be there every day when the workers are putting the letters on the pressing machine. You need to be there in order to check. So they would print one page, that would be a test page. You go over the page, you authorize it, and then for the rest of the day, they would print one page, right, 1,000 times. And tomorrow, the next page. And that's how it would go. So if you have a book of 600 pages or 500 pages, you need to take 5 months or 6 months of chufsha, right, from your place of work, and be somewhere else and observe how the work is being done. It was very, very, very expensive. I'm not speaking about just the printing itself. Let's say that you'd be able to sell the books. So you'd be able to give back the hotzaot, the expense, thank you, the expenses of the printing itself. But just sitting there and making sure everything is being done right was extremely taxing, extremely expensive, and he was just not able to do so for the more important sefarim that he wrote, which is, in a way, it is sad, but Baruch Hashem, almost everything was printed in the last 200 years. So slowly but surely, all was printed. Now, as a rabbi in Prague, he issued 2 rulings that are very important for what we would speak about in Mirza Hashem next week. In both of these rulings, he opposed and disputed the Chacham Tzvi, Rabbi Tzvi Ashkenazi, that we spoke about a month ago. And if you remember, Rabbi Tzvi Ashkenazi had a son, Rabbi Yaakov ben Tzvi, also known as the Yavitz, or Rabbi Yaakov Emdin. It's the same person. It's the son of the Chacham Tzvi. And what I'm going to say now, as I said, it's very important to understand in order to, we're preparing the ground now for next week. So he issued 2 rules, both of them fascinating. Maybe you remember the story of the heartless chicken. So that was one ruling, we'll speak about in a minute. The other ruling was about a certain woman. We'll begin with the woman because that's historically she came first. In halacha, we have a halacha, a din, a law, that if a woman is nursing her baby, she cannot remarry for 2 years, for 24 months. So if, again, a woman gave birth and her husband died, she must wait till she would finish to nurse her baby. Why? Because we are worried that the new husband, if a woman would become pregnant, then the nursing many times would cease. Now, if it's the real father of the baby, then we are not worried because he would take care that the baby would be taken care of. But if it's the new husband, then unfortunately it can happen sometimes that the new husband is less interested in the survival of the son from the last man. I'm not saying chas v'cheila that happens most of the time. I'm sure that most of the stepfathers, as we call them, are loving and caring fathers for their stepchildren. I'm sure. But unfortunately, it is not completely out of space that there would be a certain stepfather that would be maybe more similar to the stepmother from, from the stories of, Shilgia. Yeah, this type of stories. We all know them. So it can happen. It can happen. So Chachamim made a decree that a woman that lost her husband must wait 24 months after the birth of the baby in order to be able to get married. As you can understand, that can be very difficult for a woman that just lost her husband, so she lost her source of parnasa, and she's with a child, so she cannot go out to work, and she cannot remarry, so that's going to be very, very difficult. So many times women would try to find heiterim in order to get remarried earlier. Okay. So the story was that there was a certain doctor, physician, and he had a wife, and they had a baby girl, and the wife nursed the baby girl, and the baby girl died. And the husband came to the conclusion, he was a physician, he came to the conclusion that the baby died because the milk from the mother was poisoned. That's the conclusion that he came to. Now, we are not right now interested, obviously, if a doctor in the beginning of the 18th century is able or unable to go to come to such conclusion in a reliable way, but that was his conclusion. So when the next child was born, the next daughter, he forbidden his wife to try to nurse the baby. The mother, when he was away, she did try to nurse the baby, and the baby became very sick. The husband understood what is going on, and he was very angry of his wife and completely forbidden her to nurse the baby. And in the tshuva, it is described that they were poor, so he had to work very, very, very hard in order to feed the baby instead of him being nursed. So again, for us living in a very different society, it's how difficult more you have to work in order to buy materna. It's expensive. It's not so expensive. But it's very expensive. The truth is it's very expensive. But nonetheless, but for them, it seems that this doctor had to I don't know, to work in 2 jobs in order to finance the food of his baby girl. But he did that. And then he passed away. So the truth is that the mother is not nursing her baby at all. And the mother believes that it is asur for it is forbidden for her to nurse the baby. Now she wants to marry, I don't know if I can say it's funny, it's a tragedy, but she wants to marry another doctor. So she like a woman of physician. So she wanted to marry another doctor. Maybe it's a friend of her last husband. So she wanted to marry another doctor. And this doctor also says that she is not allowed to feed the baby. So the baby is anyway not being fed, not being nursed by his mom. Can we dismiss the waiting period 24 months? That was the question. And the doctor said, it seems, I'm not going to wait. If she is not marrying me now, I'm finding some other very romantic. I'm going to find some other wife. That's, Rabbanim had to deal with this type of questions. Meaning, when everything is going beautiful, then Rabbanim would not get the answer. They will not get the question. So when you read the responsa, most of the time it's very medake. Excuse me? Depressing. Yeah, it's very depressing. Why? Because if it's happy, no one asks the rabbi. That's the way it works. I'm being asked to pray for someone. So someone is fine, so I'm adding the name to the person. Many times I would never be told that the person, Baruch Hashem, is now healthy, so I continue to pray for him. Because people come to the rabbi when they have problems. They don't come to the rabbi when they're happy. If they're happy, everything is fine. Why do you need the rabbi for? So these are the type of questions. So yes, he's not a great man, but he was willing to marry her. So she wanted to give a permission to skip the waiting period. Many of the poskim allowed, because they said she's anyway not nursing the baby, and the milk is, they accepted the position that the milk is poisonous. So she's not really able to milk, and there is a halacha that if the mother is unable to milk, then to give the baby nursing, then there is no waiting period. And even now that she has milk, but it's poisonous, so it's just as not having. That was the basic argument. So the Chacham Tzvi allowed them to marry, and they did get married. About 25 years later, stands Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschitz, and he's just, debating the issue in the vacuum, but he's mentioning the name of the Chacham Tzvi. And he is writing that was a mistake. Why was that a mistake? It's very interesting. He's saying, from a scientific point of view, if the milk was poisonous, because the milk also flows in the veins of the mother, it would also poison the mother. So it must be that the milk was fine. There was only some problem with the stomach of the baby. And it can be either solved or not. But what it means is that the mother is considered a nursing mother, and you cannot allow her to remarry. Because if the problem is by the baby, not by the mother, then you cannot skip the waiting period. That was the basic argument. Now, in order to bolster his argument, he did something very, very interesting. And that was, he went to the academy in Prague and asked them to be given an expert position on the matter. And they agreed with him. They said, you are right. We are not aware of such a case in which the milk of a mother would be poisonous. There is no such a thing. And it must be that the problem is with the babies. Now, nowadays we would know that there is something called an allergy. They didn't know it back then. And yes, it's very rare, but it can happen that the baby would have some type of an allergy to the milk of his mother. So it seems that they were completely off in the science. They thought, as in the old days, they thought that the milk of the mother is from her blood. It's a blood becoming milk. And that's why if it was poisonous, she would die. So that's obviously, this part is not necessarily correct. But the part about the allergy of the baby in modern terms seems to be that they were able to put their finger on the problem. So he wrote a whole tshuva against the Chacham Tzvi on a matter that was anyhow already put to rest 30 years ago. So that was very sharp, and he gave a very good answer. And it's interesting the way that he used modern science. But he didn't make him a good friend, neither of the Chacham Tzvi, nor of his son, the Yavetz. And then he gave another tshuva, this time about the heartless chicken. And if you remember, in the heartless chicken, the Chacham Tzvi himself was relying on science, just as a reminder. So the heartless chicken was a chicken that was slaughtered and was opened, and the girl that was responsible, the servant girl that was responsible for removing the internal parts, made a testimony there was no heart to the chicken. The wife, the household, not the household, the wife, the keret habayit, the woman that is responsible for the mother of the house, she claimed that the cat ate the heart, but the servant girl is only trying to make excuse that she didn't lose the heart. So she says there was no heart to begin with. Now, if there was no heart to begin with, then the chicken is treif, and the whole chicken is asur. If there was a heart and was eaten by the cat, then they lose the heart, but the chicken is kosher. So the Chacham Tzvi said that according to science, there can be no chicken without a heart. So it must be that the cat ate the heart, and that's the end of the story. The chicken is kosher. And again, 30 years later, the Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschitz says, no, this is incorrect. Why? Because this time he sent the question all the way to the university in a place called א-להי. I'm sorry, I wasn't, you know, where is it? Yeah, א-להי. So there was a big university there, seemingly, and he sent the question. Now he said to them, is it possible, that was how the question was formulated, is it possible that the chicken would not have a heart, but would have a different organ that would assume the roles of the heart? Now we understand that you must need some pumping device, but can you have a different device than the heart itself? So they told him, we do not understand where you're going with this question. That's how they begin. Why would you ask such a question? But after you asked, we had a convention of all the wise men of autonomy in our university, and we came to the conclusion that if there would be a different organ, but it needs to have rooms and it needs to have the aliyot. How do you say the aliyot? The chambers. So the chambers, so yes, so you can have a second heart that would do the assume the roles of the original heart. So said the Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschitz, you see. So it may be that the heart was missing, but you didn't check for a different organ that would make the same ruling, the same roles. Now, what is very interesting is that Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschitz said in this paragraph, what is very interesting is that he's quoting verbatim, meaning he's translating, but he's quoting the people of the academy, of the University of א-להי, in a halachic book. So that is very unique. That is very unique. And the second is that he writes there, he says, you need to know that science is not what it used to be. What do I mean by that? It used to be that someone like Aristotle would sit down and would create a whole picture, a metaphysic and a physical picture of the world. But nowadays, science is not theoretical anymore. It's experimental. It comes by observations and not by intellect. So that means that even scientists themselves would admit that everything they say is only till they would see a different thing. When you philosophize science, it's very important. When you philosophize science, then what you say is the truth. At least you believe it to be the truth. You may be wrong, but what you say is the bottom line. You had figured out how the world works, and now you can understand all the conclusions derived from that. But when you are walking from down up, not from philosophizing what should be the world, but observing what there is and trying to come up with rules, with conclusions, that maybe tomorrow you'd see a new observation and you'd throw away everything you said up till now. So that means, he says, that science cannot be relied as something that is completely true. Because they themselves would admit it's only a doubt. Now that's signified that he had a very strong understanding of the new science that was emerging in the 18th century. He had a very deep understanding of what does it mean. And so it's very interesting. He was relying on science much more than other Rabbanim. But because he had such an intimate understanding of science, he was also able to understand its limitations. And sometimes someone from the outside has more faith in science than something that is from from within. And it seems that Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschitz understood it. So again, you can think whatever you think about his idea of a second heart. But he felt that if it was not ruled out that such an option is viable, then the chicken should be considered treif. Because there was a girl that gave a testimony that there was no heart, so there was no, it's treif. So that's the end of the story. And science does not, for sure, says that it is impossible. So that's a second answer in which he disagrees with the Chacham Tzvi and published that publicly. And also it seems that we have testimonials that he said, now the Chacham Tzvi was printed on a very wide margins book. It was considered to be beautiful then, that you had you know what I mean? That you would have room to write your footnotes. So when you'd be sold the book, you'd be able to add your footnotes. So it was considered, nowadays, you see, it's very narrow. You can write almost nothing. But back then it was considered, I don't know what to say, more scholarly. Right? If you would publish a book with wide margins, so people would be able to write their footnotes, agree, disagree. Fine, beautiful. It's also a sign of humility that you admit that there are things to add to your book. Beautiful. Rabbi Yonatan Eibeschitz seemed to have said to some of his fans that even it was printed with very wide margins, the Chacham Tzvi book, it's still not wide enough to contain all the corrections that needs to be done. Now, as I said, he had very smart wits, but sometimes it just goes too far. And it seems that some people that were Bali Lashon Hara had made sure that what he said would come to the Chacham Tzvi and to Rabbi Yaakov Emdin. And that created a very big rift, which would play a very ugly role, I'm sorry to say that, but a very ugly role in the Jewish Rabbanut, in the Jewish life, as a matter of fact, in the beginning of the first half, in the first half of the 18th century, but that is a story that we need to tell Be'ezrat Hashem next week. So thank you, and I hope to see you Be'ezrat Hashem next week.